In this lesson, you will use type definitions to assist with propagating data type changes throughout an application. Suppose you're working with a cluster that contains weather data, and you decide that you want to add another item to that cluster. What will this mean for your code and the rest of your application? Here we see a block diagram for an application where you use the weather data cluster. Where on this block diagram will you have to make edits? Here we see the front panel for an application that uses a weather data cluster. Let's observe the effects of changing the cluster data type. In this case, we're going to add a numeric indicator to the weather data cluster, and we'll name that numeric data current wind speed. Now, let's look at our block diagram. Here we can see that we have several broken wires that result from changes that we made to the weather data cluster. To address the problem of type change propagation, use a type def. A type def is a master copy of the data type and is saved separately. On this block diagram, every instance of the weather data cluster has been replaced with an instance of weatherdata.ctl. Let's make the same cluster modification that we looked at earlier. To do this, I open the type def. And as before, I will add a numeric indicator and name it current wind speed. Now when I save the type def and go back to the main VI, we can see that the current wind speed has been added to the cluster and no broken wires occurred. Now let's explore how you can create a type definition from an existing control or indicator. Right-click that controller indicator, in this case the weather data cluster, and choose Make Type Def from the shortcut menu. Let's return to our block diagram. You can see that the weather data indicator now has a black mark in the corner. This indicates that it's a type definition. To gain the benefit of change propagation for this type, you would have to replace the cluster constant and update each of the sub-VIs to use the weather data type def. Now let's explore how you can create a type def from the Project Explorer. Right-click My Computer and select this option. Now expand Other Files and choose Type Definition and select OK. Now I could create the weather data cluster here and use it wherever I need to. Anytime you create a cluster or enum, you should immediately convert it to a type def. Cluster and enum data types are typically used in multiple places in an application. Modifications to clusters and enums, for example, adding, modifying, or removing items, typically need to propagate to all of their instances. Here's a summary of what you've learned in this lesson.